Hi, so this is my first video, I guess. This is a topic I've been wanting to cover for a while now, so I figured this would be a good one to make my first video on and upload it to YouTube, start up the channel. I'll try not to chase it too far down the rabbit hole here. We'll see how how that goes, but I have some notes to kind of help me keep on track. Um, so I'm going to talk about caffeine. Caffeine intake, something I see used, I'd say inappropriately, ineffectively, with a lot of strength physique athletes. Um, there are a lot of upsides to caffeine. It's a known performance enhancer. Um, it's, a stimulant, well studied. The effects are just very well known, that it can boost performance. The downsides, I guess, and negatives is that there is an adaptation over time with caffeine, meaning that 100 milligrams today, tomorrow, the next day, by the fourth day, that 100 milligrams doesn't hit you nearly like it did the first day. So it is something that it adapts over, your body adapts to it over time with use. That's why you see I think a lot of people going 1 scoop to 2 scoops to 3 scoops of pre, just because of that caffeine adaptation. Another downside is the addictiveness of it. It is an addictive substance. So if you're using it constantly 3 times a day, and then I know I've been here with back in school, I got into a little bit of a rut where I was overusing caffeine, and the few days that I stopped taking it, I had some nasty headaches. So there is an addictive portion to it. In addition, it can interfere with sleep if you're taking it too close to sleep, or to your bedtime. So before I get into how I think you can leverage caffeine, its effects, maximize its impact, and sort of minimize the downfalls of it that I just covered, let's cover over some prereqs, some kind of baseline stuff you should be covering before you even get into utilizing caffeine. First off, make sure you're sleeping well. Get your sleep habits cleaned up. If you need caffeine to get through your 9 to 5 workday at your office desk, I can assure you, you're not getting enough sleep. You should not be falling asleep at your desk. If you're getting, I'd say 8 to 10 hours a night, you're going to be feeling great. So that's something, that's the first prerequisite, I would say. If you want to read more into sleep, learn more about sleep, I would recommend Joe Rogan's podcast with Matt Walker. He has some really good insight in how you can clean up your sleep habits. This is something I've cleaned up in the last year, and it's made a huge impact. And like I said, if you're falling asleep at your desk every day, and you feel like you need that caffeine, get more sleep. It'll help clean things up. The other prerequisite here, I'm going to make the assumption that your training is already appropriately periodized, meaning that throughout a mesocycle block, training block, whatever you want to call it, you are building either volume, intensity, depending on whether you're focused on physique, strength, both, depending on the phase that you're in, So at the beginning of mesocycle, you're going to start at lower intensities, lower volumes, and then build to higher volumes or higher intensities. By intensity, I mean percentage of 1 rep max, or 10 rep max is what I usually program off of. So building in difficulty and overall intensity of the programs. And then also with that, making sure that you have specific deload periods within those mesocycles. You can't just build volume forever. So you build, or intensity, you build it, and then you deload, and you build it. So taking that deload week in between blocks, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but you can leverage that to maximize the impact of caffeine. If you're interested in learning more about periodization, I'd recommend binge watching Renaissance periodization stuff, specifically Dr. Mike Israetel's work. He's got a lot of content out there. You can learn a lot. I know I've learned a lot from him. He really makes you think and provides some really good content, particularly on the Revive Stronger podcast. Okay, so now that we've gotten those two prerequisites of sleep cleaned up and properly periodized training, I'm going to get quickly into how you can leverage caffeine. So first off, this ties directly in with how I said you shouldn't need caffeine to stay awake at your 9 to 5. If you really want to maximize its effectiveness, only use it pre-training. Only time you should use it is pre-training. If you're drinking a lot of coffee, here's my decaf here, all the time, I recommend making that switch to decaf. Unless you want to drink coffee pre-training, but pre-training is really when you should be using your caffeine. If you really want to maximize its effectiveness, I would use it only then. So along with that, and then tying into the second point about having properly periodized training, I recommend starting your mesocycle or block at a lower dose of caffeine or no caffeine at all for your intro week. Just because you shouldn't really need a whole lot of caffeine in those intro weeks. They shouldn't really be that hard. If they're crazy challenging, you're pushing to failure, take a look at your training again, because that first week should not be a difficult week. So with that first week might be no caffeine or just a little bit, maybe 100 milligrams a session. And then you can slowly build that up from week to week. Say 100 the first week, 200 the second week, 300, 400, depending on your tolerance, how well you tolerate caffeine. Another thing you can do and think about is leveraging caffeine on the days that you really want to focus on. Either it's your harder training days, or it's just a weak area for you if you're trying to bring up your, I'd say, side delts and biceps. I usually do those on my pull days. If I'm trying to bring those two body parts up, it's not a bad idea to really use caffeine on those days and take it easy on the caffeine on the days that I'm training body parts that aren't a focus of mine in a given time frame, mesocycle, etc. So just kind of getting into an example of how I use it. I kind of alluded to this, but in the first week of a mesocycle, I'll usually start with either like I said, no caffeine or 100 milligrams maybe on one day, or like on the day, maybe on the day that I am focusing on, and then just keeping stim-free pre-workout, or using a stim-free pre-workout for all the other days. Actually, I should backtrack a little bit. I always use a stim-free pre-workout, which I've been formulating on my own. But I do add caffeine pills when necessary. That's how I can scale the dose appropriately. So I like this particular product. I use Primal One's caffeine L-theanine. I like the L-theanine, kind of balances out the caffeine. It's about 100 milligrams it is 100 milligrams of caffeine per pill. So, and I do have some other brand which I don't have with me right now, which is I think 67 per caplet, so I can kind of use that to adjust my caffeine intake for a given training session accordingly. So with that, the first week I might use maybe 100 milligrams on the days that I'm on the focused body parts. Getting into the second week, I'll get to 200, 250 milligrams. By the third week, I'm 300, 350, and then by the fourth or fifth week, depending on how long the mesocycle is, this is kind of, you should think ahead how long your mesocycle is, how much you want to scale it. I tend to do pretty well at around 400 milligrams total. When I say total, I don't like taking that in one shot. Usually, like 200 milligrams about 20 minutes before I start training, and then my sessions are pretty long, usually closer to 2 hours. So maybe about a half hour in, take another 200 milligrams. So you get that kind of that the first dose isn't really wearing off by the end of my session. So with that, obviously I've gotten up to, say by the end of a block, I've gotten up to 400 milligrams of caffeine. At that point, I'm pretty adapted to it. So with that, that's kind of the high end of the doses that I like. I tend to use at the very, very end of my mesocycle, and then at the end of my mesocycle, between mesocycles, I deload. So my mesocycle ends, I deload right after, and during that deload week, I do not consume any caffeine at all. Really, the goal of that week, from a caffeine perspective, is to resensitize myself to the usage of caffeine. And taking a full week off of caffeine really tends to do the trick, to get me in a place where I can start reintroducing it, and then at a low dose of, like I said, like 100 milligrams, I can feel the impact of that. So I guess just kind of recapping why I do it that way. So the larger doses over time tends to mitigate that adaptation that you see with caffeine. Your body adapts to caffeine, so you will need slightly larger doses over time. And as your training progresses throughout a mesocycle, your training is going to get harder. So really having that caffeine especially if you're pushing a lot of sets really close to failure, with a lot of volume, a lot of high set count, that caffeine really can come in handy when you're only leaving maybe one rep in the tank for multiple sets, because that can really be draining and really wear you down. So caffeine can really keep that bumped up. So larger doses over time in order to mitigate that adaptation effect and leverage larger doses when you need them, which is later in a mesocycle. And then second thing, why only use it pre-training? Again, it gets into the adaptation. If you're only using it once per day, you're not going to adapt nearly as quickly as if, say, you're drinking 3 cups of coffee and then using it at the gym. You're not going to adapt nearly as quickly if you're only using it once per day. So that you really want that to hold that effectiveness and really retain and keep that in the tank for your training, the effectiveness of caffeine. That's if you're only using it pre-training, then it's going to have a much bigger impact. And then with deloads, using that to resensitize yourself. And again, this is I should backtrack a little bit. Using it only pre-training too can mitigate the addiction effect from that as well, since you're only using it once per day. And then deloads to like I said, resensitize yourself, and then take that break off of caffeine, and then mitigating the addictive effects of it. So okay, that covers pretty pretty much the highlights of how I like to leverage caffeine. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm glad I didn't go too far down the rabbit hole. I thought I was going to go further than that and start rambling. I mean, I did a little bit, but I think I kept on topic. So, yeah, hit me up if you have any questions. Like, subscribe. I guess that's what all the YouTubers say these days. So, I appreciate it. Thanks. See ya.